Under the soft glow of Atlanta's evening lights, Naomi Brooks pushed open the glass door of the Ivory Spire, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, and stepped into a world that was never designed with her in mind. The moment she crossed the threshold, she felt it. The pause, the flicker, the tiny hitch in the room's rhythm as eyes slid over her dark skin, her simple gray sweater, and her worn-in sneakers. To them, she wasn't a paying guest with a purpose. She was an interruption, an out-of-place note in their carefully orchestrated symphony of wealth. They didn't know that the woman in the gray sweater was married to Lucas Brooks, the white tech billionaire whose software had quietly reshaped half the city's skyline. They didn't know that she could walk into this place any night with a black card and a reservation under his name and be treated like royalty. They just saw what they wanted to see, and in a few minutes, they were going to regret it. If this story of prejudice, courage, and quiet revenge hits something in you already, make sure you stick around. And before we go deeper, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments, which country are you listening from right now? Where are you catching Naomi's story? Because the twist waiting at the end of this night in Atlanta is one you don't want to miss. With the sun had already slipped behind the jagged outline of Atlanta's skyline, leaving the city brushed in lavender blue. Towers of glass and steel blurred into a soft haze, while streetlights winked on, one by one, like golden fireflies above the sidewalks. Naomi stepped out of the community center on Auburn Avenue, pulling the door closed behind her. Her sneakers tapped down the concrete steps, each soft thud echoing a long day's work. She was 32, with deep brown skin that caught the city's shimmer and dark curls pulled into a loose puff at the back of her head. There was a tiredness in her shoulders, yes, but beneath it, a flame of purpose that refused to dim. Her gray sweater hung comfortably over her frame, paired with jeans that had seen more classrooms and community meetings than fancy dinners. Pale white chalk dust clung to her fingers and smudged her thighs from where she wiped her hands during a workshop. Just an hour ago, she'd been inside that center, standing at a battered whiteboard, talking to black teens from overlooked neighborhoods about leadership, self-worth, and how to take up space in a world determined to shrink them. They'd laughed, argued, pushed back, and asked questions that told her one simple truth. They were paying attention. Now outside, she paused and tilted her chin up, drawing a deep breath of the crisp October air. It carried the warm scent of roasted peanuts from a nearby cart, tangled with the sharp bite of car exhaust and the faint sweetness of something fried drifting from a food truck down the block. Naomi glanced at her watch. 6:47 p.m., right on time. Her lips curved into a small, secret smile. She had one stop to make before heading home. One tiny errand that meant more than any investor pitch her husband had given that month. In 7 days, she and Lucas would celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary. 10 years since that first awkward night, squeezed around a tiny table at the Ivory Spire. Back when he was just a pale, restless coder with a laptop held together by stickers and hope. And she was a community organizer who could light up a room with her laugh and shut it down with one raised eyebrow. Now Lucas was the Lucas Brooks, the tech visionary plastered across business magazines, the white billionaire who could casually move markets with a tweet. And Naomi? She was still the same woman who'd argued with him about data ethics on their first date, but now she'd added board member of the Brooks Foundation to her resume, along with mentor, advocate, and the one who remembers why any of this matters. She was his anchor, his conscience, his equal. Tonight she wanted to give him something simple and perfect. She wanted to bring him back to where it had all started. Not with cameras, press, or some ostentatious party, just the two of them. A quiet table where they'd once shared shrimp and grits, nerves, and impossible dreams. A table that had become, in her heart, a kind of altar. The Ivory Spire wasn't just a restaurant. It was a symbol, a shrine to old money, new money, and every type of status in between. People bragged about getting a reservation there, the way other people bragged about trips to Paris. Its name floated through certain circles like a password. Naomi didn't care about its pedigree tonight. She wasn't going there to be seen. She was going for one simple thing: to lock in a reservation for next Friday, to carve out 2 sacred hours from her husband's relentless blur of calls, negotiations, and launches. To say, in her own quiet way, I remember where we started. Do you? Her hand brushed over the phone in her pocket, thumb itching to text him. Guess where I am. But she stopped herself, her smile deepening. No, this one she wanted to keep to herself, at least for a week. She set off down the sidewalk, her stride even and unhurried. Atlanta pulsed around her, men in slim suits barking into phones, couples laughing over cocktails at sidewalk patios, a street musician coaxing a soulful tune from his saxophone as loose bills fluttered in his open case. Naomi's gaze drifted up to the skyline, the emerald glow of the Bank of America Tower boring into the darkening sky. She loved this city, its grit, its music, its contradictions. It hurt her sometimes, yes, but it was home. As a black woman married to a white billionaire, she'd learned to live with the double takes, the raised eyebrows, the whispers in fancy boutiques and hotel lobbies, the moments where people spoke to Lucas and acted like she wasn't even there. It burned some days, but not tonight. Tonight, she chose to think of his grin when he realized what she'd done. That boyish, lopsided smile he still got when something genuinely surprised him. The same smile he'd had over their first shared plate of shrimp and grits when he'd said, "Give me a little time and a lot of code, and I'll build a life so solid you'll never have to doubt it." The walk to the Ivory Spire took about 15 minutes. Her sneakers whispered over the pavement as she turned onto Peachtree Street, the heart of polished Atlanta. The restaurant loomed ahead of her, its facade a gleaming wall of glass and creamy stone. Tall windows spilled warm, golden light onto the sidewalk, framing a scene that looked ripped from a luxury magazine. Tables dressed in starch-white linens, wine glasses glowing, silverware lined with almost military precision. Through the glass, she caught quick flashes of the inside. Men in tuxedos, women in sleek gowns, a whisper of crystal, the tilt of champagne flutes, the easy, relaxed posture of people who never worried about the bill. Naomi tugged lightly at the hem of her sweater. She hadn't dressed for this. Why would she? It was supposed to be a quick stop, a 5-minute detour on her way home. Next week, she planned to walk in here in a dark emerald dress Lucas loved, curls pinned up, heels making her almost his height. Tonight, she was just Naomi. Chalk dust and sneakers and purpose. Her reflection ghosted over the glass door as she reached for the handle. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. This place had never really been her scene. She felt more herself at a crowded West Side diner with jukebox music and fried catfish, where nobody looked twice at scuffed shoes. But this building held their history. She saw it in her mind, Lucas laughing nervously over a too spicy appetizer, his pale hand brushing hers. The way he had looked at her that night like she was the future he wanted, even before he had the resources to promise anything. She straightened her shoulders. For him, she could walk into any room. Naomi pushed the door open. Cool, perfumed air washed over her instantly. Lavender, polished wood, and aged wine wrapped around her, drawing a sharp line between the night outside and the curated world within. The heavy glass door whispered shut behind her. For a moment, the room seemed to inhale. The marble floor beneath her sneakers gleamed like still water, mirroring crystal chandeliers that dripped from the vaulted ceiling. Every prism of glass caught the light and scattered it in delicate patterns over crisp tablecloths and polished silver. Through the towering windows behind her, Atlanta's skyline glimmered. But inside, it felt like another universe. A universe of murmured deals, anniversary toasts, and casual mentions of vacations in cities half the world away. Naomi took one step forward. Her sneakers squeaked, a tiny, innocent sound that somehow carried like a shout. Heads turned, not all at once, not dramatically, just enough. A man in a dark tux paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. A woman in a sequin gown lifted her eyes from her menu, lips slowing around the rim of her glass. Another couple paused mid-conversation, their eyes flicking up, then back, then up again. It wasn't curiosity, it was assessment. Her dark skin, her gray sweater, jeans dusted with faint white smudges, a face they'd never seen here before. She felt the attention settle onto her shoulders like a heavy shawl, But she didn't let it bend her spine. Instead, she lifted her chin a fraction. She had walked into boardrooms where not a single person looked like her and forced them to hear about food deserts and underfunded schools. This was just another room. Her gaze swept the dining room and found the host stand at the center like a command post. A sleek podium of dark wood stood under its own spotlight, and behind it, a woman watched Naomi's every step. The woman wore a perfectly tailored black suit that fit like armor. Her straight, chestnut hair was scraped back into a severe bun, not a strand out of place. Her name tag read, Elena. Elena's eyes were cold and sharp, scanning Naomi from the crown of her curls to the tips of her sneakers in a single, precise sweep. It didn't feel like she was looking at another human being. It felt like she was scanning a problem. Naomi had seen that look before, in upscale boutiques, at hotel check-in counters when she traveled alone, in the lobby of Lucas's first investor meeting when they assumed she was the help. It said, "You don't fit here. Prove you belong or leave." She took a slow breath and moved toward the podium, weaving between tables that smelled faintly of butter, truffle, and something delicate she couldn't name. The buzz of conversation resumed, but she felt eyes still tracking her. A man in a pinstripe suit muttered something to his companion, glancing toward her with a smirk. A woman with diamond studs and an icy chignon studied Naomi over the rim of her glass, one brow arched just so. Naomi pushed all of it to the edges of her awareness. Elena was her destination. She stopped at the podium and mustered the warm, professional smile that had opened 1,000 closed doors in her life. "Good evening," she said calmly. "I was hoping to make a reservation for next Friday." Elena's lips pressed into a narrow line. For a second, she said nothing. The silence between them thickened. "Next Friday?" Elena finally replied, voice cool, clipped. "We're fully booked for the next 2 months." There it was, not "let me check," not "we're very busy," but perhaps just a wall. Naomi's smile didn't falter, though she felt a small sting of annoyance. "I understand you're busy," she said evenly. "It's for a special anniversary. 10 years. My husband and I had our first date here. It would mean a lot to us to come back." She let that sit there, simple and honest. Not a threat, not a flex. Just the truth. Elena's gaze didn't soften. If anything, it grew sharper as she took Naomi in again. This time slower, like she was cataloging offenses. "We're fully booked," she repeated, her tone final. Naomi's chest tightened. She had worked with enough nonprofits and donors to recognize when policy was code for something else. But she tried one more angle. "Could you maybe put us on a wait list?" she asked gently. "We're flexible on time. We just really wanted to come back to where it started." The other woman's fingers tightened on the edge of the reservation book, though she still hadn't opened it. Before Naomi could say anything more, a voice sliced through the air behind her. "Elena, why is my table not ready?" It boomed across the dining room, loud enough to make people flinch. Naomi turned slightly. A man in his 50s strode up to the podium like he owned the place. His face was ruddy from too much wine or too much ego. His silver hair swept back in a style that screamed money and old entitlement. His navy suit clung to a broad frame, the fabric expensive and loud without needing sequins. He didn't look at Naomi at first. He simply pushed past her as if she were a misplaced piece of furniture. "Preston Whitmore," he snapped, tapping the podium. "Corner table. I told you I wanted the '89 Bordeaux breathing by now." Elena's entire demeanor flipped. The frost melted. Her posture softened. A smile bloomed across her face, smooth and eager. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice suddenly warm. "I'm so sorry for the delay. I'll see to it right away." Her hands flew over the book, suddenly alive with energy. Naomi stood there, her request still hanging unanswered between them, watching the transformation. For him, warmth, apology, urgency. For her, stone. She cleared her throat softly. "As I was saying," she tried, gently reclaiming a sliver of space. Preston's head swiveled toward her then, as if noticing her for the first time. His pale eyes swept over her sweater, jeans, skin. His lips curled. He didn't address her directly. He leaned closer to Elena, his voice lowering but perfectly pitched to carry. "I thought this place had standards," he said, with a lazy, poisonous drawl. Who let her in here dressed like that? A couple at a nearby table chuckled under their breath. Someone else shook their head, amused. Naomi felt heat flood her cheeks, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. She'd stared down donors who thought doing the bare minimum gave them the right to disrespect her community. I'm just here to make a reservation for next week, she said, voice calm but firm. Not dining tonight. Preston gave a short, ugly laugh and finally spoke to her directly. This isn't some roadside diner, sweetheart, he scoffed. You don't just wander in here in dusty jeans and ask for favors? He gestured dismissively at her outfit, at her entire existence. If you can't dress like you belong, maybe you don't. Elena's eyes flicked between them, discomfort flickering for just a second before she smoothed it over. She said nothing. Her silence sat on the podium like a rubber stamp of approval. Naomi's heart pounded against her ribs. This is about Lucas and our anniversary, she reminded herself. Not about him, not about them. Sir, she said, her voice dipping slightly but steadying again. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm asking to pay for a table. That's all. Preston rolled his eyes dramatically. You're disturbing the room, he muttered, already turning away. Handle this, Elena. My guests are waiting. He swaggered back to his table by the window, greeted by soft laughter and clinking glasses. The humiliation rose in Naomi's throat like fire, but she kept her shoulders square. She turned back to Elena. As I said, she repeated quietly, I'd just like to book a table. Next Friday. Elena leaned forward slightly, her eyes cooling even further, and lowered her voice. It's not about the money, she said, each word slow and deliberate. Her gaze traveled over Naomi's face, her sweater, her skin. We serve a certain clientele. The message was clear, not you. Naomi's breath caught. There it was. No code, no euphemism. Just the truth, laid bare in 4 words. Before she could respond, Preston's voice rose again from across the room. Some people don't know their place, he crowed, lifting his glass toward the podium. This isn't a charity line. Laughter broke out, short, sharp bursts, a few stifled giggles. It washed over Naomi in a wave of heat and noise. Her hands trembled at her sides, chalk smearing into her palms. But she planted her feet on the gleaming marble and refused to move. I'm requesting a reservation, she said louder this time, so that Elena and the room could hear her. Not a handout, not a favor. A reservation, like everyone else. The air between them crackled. That was when another presence entered the scene. Heels clicked sharply over the marble, each step announcing authority more than elegance. A woman in her 40s approached from the interior of the dining room. Her blonde hair was twisted into an elegant knot, her black dress simple but expensive. A thin gold bracelet glinted at her wrist. Her name tag read, Victoria, Manager. Is there a problem here? Victoria asked Elena, though her eyes were already locked on Naomi. Elena straightened. This woman is leaving, Elena said smoothly, flicking her hand toward Naomi as if brushing away lint. She's causing a disturbance. Naomi's jaw tightened. Actually, I'm not, she said, turning to face Victoria fully. I'm trying to book a table for a special occasion, for my husband and me. I've been told you're fully booked, but no one has even opened the book to check. Victoria's gaze drifted over Naomi slowly, from coils of hair to sneakers, then settled into something hard. You're disturbing our guests, she said coolly, tilting her head toward Preston's table, where he sat smirking, wine glass raised like a prop. This is a fine dining environment. We can't have scenes at the door. Naomi laughed once softly, disbelief and anger mixing in the sound. A scene? She asked. I walked in, asked to make a reservation, and stood here while your regular insulted me in front of everyone. Preston clucked his tongue dramatically and called out again. This isn't your kind of place, he said, almost gleeful now. Let her find somewhere. More appropriate. More chuckles, more murmurs. Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping. Ma'am, I'm asking you to leave, she said. You're not welcome here. Not like this. The words sliced clean through Naomi's chest. Not like this. She knew exactly what this meant. Her sweater, her jeans, her skin. Naomi swallowed hard. For a second she considered dropping Lucas's name, saying his full title, watching their faces crumble. But something in her resisted the instinct to prove her worth with someone else's net worth. "I'm a customer," she said instead, her voice quieter now but no less firm. "I'm not yelling. I'm not causing damage. I asked for a table, and you're throwing me out because you don't like how I look." Victoria's lips thinned. "I've asked you to leave," she repeated, the steel in her tone sharpening. "If you don't, I'll have you removed." She lifted a hand and snapped her fingers once. From near the entrance, a young man in a black uniform stepped forward. He couldn't have been more than 20. His shoulders were narrow, his expression pinched with discomfort. His name tag read, Tyler. "Tyler," Victoria said, not taking her eyes off Naomi. "Please escort this woman outside." Tyler hesitated, looking from his manager to Naomi. His jaw worked like he wanted to say something, but didn't know how. "Ma'am," he said softly, almost apologetically, "if you could come with me, please." For a few seconds, time stretched thin. Naomi looked around the room, at the people who had laughed, at the ones who refused to make eye contact, at the few whose faces showed a flicker of unease, and nothing more. She felt shame trying to claw its way up her throat, but beneath it, something else rose. Resolve. "You will not break me here," she thought. She drew in a slow breath, then exhaled. "That's how you want to do this?" she asked Victoria quietly. "All right." Her voice didn't crack. She refused to give them that. She turned and allowed Tyler to walk a step beside her, his hand hovering awkwardly near her elbow, but never quite touching. Her sneakers squeaked again, each sound a metronome marking a forced exit. The dining room watched, some with open curiosity, some with thin smirks, some with faces that said, "This is wrong," but not wrong enough to stand up over. The glass door to the ivory spire loomed ahead. Tyler pulled it open for her, his eyes downcast, shame flickering across his features. I'm sorry," he murmured. Naomi stepped out into the October night, the cool air hitting her flushed face like cold water. The sounds of the city rushed back in, cars, horns, a distant siren, the murmur of pedestrians. Behind her, the door closed with a soft, final thud. Just like that, she was out, cast aside, her simple request twisted into a public spectacle. Her dark skin and gray sweater had spoken louder to them than her voice ever could. She stood on the sidewalk, breathing hard, her fingers trembling as they wrapped around her phone. Lucas's name glowed faintly on the screen where she'd pulled it up with muscle memory. For a moment, she hovered her thumb over the call button. Should she tell him? Should she drag him into this ugly moment? Before she could decide, a low, powerful purr cut through the noise of Peachtree Street. Naomi looked up. A sleek black Bentley glided toward the curb in front of the ivory spire, its polished body catching the restaurant's warm light and throwing it back in gleaming ribbons. The car rolled to a stop like it belonged wherever it chose to rest. Her heart stuttered. She knew that sound. She knew that car. She had no idea that in the next few minutes, the same people who had laughed at her would be scrambling to rewrite the story they'd just told themselves about the woman in the gray sweater. Because the man stepping out of that Bentley was her husband, and the ivory spire was about to learn exactly who they had thrown out of their temple. The October air clung to Naomi's skin, cool and sharp against the heat still burning in her chest. She stood rooted on the sidewalk, staring blindly at the passing cars while the ivory spire glowed behind her, like a smug, indifferent jewel. She flicked her thumb over her phone screen. Lucas's contact open, his smiling face staring back at her. Say it, she thought. Tell him. But for a moment, pride held her tongue. She was tired of being a walking lesson, tired of dragging him into rooms where people only understood her worth once they knew whose wife she was. Then the low, familiar rumble reached her. She looked up. A black Bentley eased out of the stream of traffic and slid up to the curb, as if the street itself were making room. The car's glossy surface reflected the warm light from the ivory spire's windows, turning the doors into liquid gold. The engine quieted and the driver's door opened. Lucas stepped out. At 38, he carried his success without the loudness of men like Preston. His navy suit was clean, tailored, but understated. His sandy hair was slightly mussed from running his hand through it one too many times between meetings. His pale fingers curled around the edge of the door for balance as he straightened, blue eyes scanning the entrance automatically. Then he saw her. Naomi? His voice cut through the street noise, threaded with confusion. Hey. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Hey, she answered, but the word came out brittle at the edges. He closed the car door and crossed the distance in long, quick strides, the concern on his face deepening as he took her in. Her tense shoulders, the way she clutched her phone, the rawness in her eyes. What happened? He asked softly. You look like you're about to either cry or punch a wall. A humorless huff escaped her. Maybe both, she murmured. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Talk to me. For a moment she considered brushing it off, saying she just had a long day, suggesting they grab takeout and forget this detour. But the laughter from inside, Preston's voice, the words "we serve a certain clientele," they all rose up in her mind like a tide she could no longer hold back. I came to make a reservation, she said, staring at a crack in the pavement, so she wouldn't have to see his face when she told him. For next Friday, for us, for our anniversary. Lucas's expression softened. You did? She nodded. I thought it would be full circle, where it started. I love that, he said instantly, then gentler. So what went wrong? Naomi swallowed, her throat suddenly tight. They wouldn't even open the book, she said quietly. The hostess. Then some regular decided I was ruining the view. The manager told me I wasn't welcome. Not like this. His jaw tightened. Not like what? Lucas asked, though from the way his eyes flicked to her sweater, jeans, and then to the restaurant's glittering interior, he already knew. She met his gaze, the words tasting sour as she spoke them. Black, in a gray sweater, without a man in a navy suit standing next to me, she said. Take your pick. Silence fell between them for a beat. The city hummed around them, indifferent. Lucas's hand found hers, fingers closing firmly around her chalk-dusted palm. They kicked you out? He asked, voice quieter now, stripped of its usual dry humor. Naomi nodded once. With everyone watching, she said, security escort and all, I didn't say your name. Didn't want to use you like a shield. A muscle jumped in his cheek. For a second, he looked like he might explode right there on the sidewalk. But when he spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. Okay, he said. Then we go back in together. And we ask them why a paying customer, who happens to be my wife, isn't welcome. She hesitated. Lucas, I don't want this to turn into a circus, she said. Those people inside? They already stared at me like I was a problem. I don't need them thinking I dragged my billionaire husband here to teach them a lesson. His fingers tightened around hers. You didn't drag me, he said. They invited this when they decided who's allowed to have dignity in that room. I'm not going in there to wave money around. I'm going in as your husband. He held her gaze. You want to leave right now and never look back? He added. We'll do that. You want to walk in with your head high and make them say to your face why you weren't good enough? I'm with you. But I'm not letting this sit on your chest alone. She searched his face. The anger banked behind his eyes, the steadiness in his voice. Slowly, the tightness in her throat loosened. Fine, she said. We go in. But you don't have to burn the building down. He gave a humorless half smile. Let's see how flammable it already is, he replied. They turned together toward the glass doors of the ivory spire. Inside, the dining room had settled back into its low murmur. Preston held court at his window table, gesturing with his wine glass as if he were narrating the world's most fascinating story. Elena stood at the podium again, smoothing a hand over the reservation book as though nothing had happened. The door swung open. Cool, scented air poured over Naomi's skin again, but this time she was not alone. Lucas's presence beside her, his height, his bearing, his hand wrapped around hers, shifted the energy immediately. Heads turned again. This time the reaction was different. Recognition flickered in a few faces. A whisper moved like a breeze from one table to another, carrying his name. That's Brooks, right? From Axiom Systems? Elena's eyes snapped up. Her practiced smile appeared automatically, but for the first time that evening, it wavered halfway. Good evening, sir, she said, defaulting to protocol. Welcome to the Ivory Spire. Do you have a reservation? Lucas stepped up to the podium, still holding Naomi's hand. I'm meeting my wife, he said. She was just here. He nodded toward Naomi. She came ahead to make a reservation for next Friday. The hostess looked at Naomi as if seeing her all over again, this time not as an intruder, but as an extension of the man standing beside her. I, I see, Elena stammered. Her gaze flicked to the reservation book, then to the dining room, then back to Lucas. I'm not sure. Did she perhaps leave? There was some confusion. Confusion is one word for it, Naomi said under her breath. Lucas's eyes stayed on Elena, his tone still controlled. There's no confusion on our side, he said. My wife asked to book a table for our anniversary. She was told you were fully booked without anyone checking. She was told she wasn't welcome. Then someone called staff to remove her. Elena's face drained a shade. Mr. She started, hoping maybe he was just some wealthy man with an attitude. Brooks, he supplied. Lucas Brooks. The name landed with a quiet but heavy thud. Someone at a nearby table choked on their drink. A murmur flickered through the room, a few eyes widening as memories of headlines. Tech visionary raises another billion. Brooks Foundation funds youth initiative. Clicked into place. Elena swallowed. Mr. Brooks, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding, she said hastily. We never meant to offend. It's just that our policies— Your policies what? Lucas asked, the edge sneaking into his voice now. Prevent you from taking a reservation from a black woman in a sweater? He didn't raise his voice, but it carried. Conversations at nearby tables trailed off. Forks hovered midair. From the window, Preston turned in his chair, his pale eyes glittering with renewed interest. Are we still on this? He drawled loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. He pushed his chair back and stood, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of his glass. She was making a scene. This is a fine dining establishment. Some of us come here to enjoy our meal, not watch a protest. Several people shifted in their seats. The elderly couple at the corner table looked distinctly uncomfortable now. Lucas turned his head slowly toward Preston. And you are? He asked in a tone that sounded polite on the surface but carried steel underneath. Preston Whitmore, the man replied, puffing his chest. I've been eating here since before your app or whatever it is existed. I know the standards. We don't bring in just anyone off the street. His eyes slid over Naomi again, openly contemptuous. Naomi felt Lucas's hand harden around hers. She could practically feel his heartbeat in his palm. Just to clarify, Lucas said, still addressing Preston, by off the street, you mean my wife, who walked in, asked quietly about a reservation, and stood there while you insulted her clothing and implied she didn't belong here because she doesn't dress like your reflection. A flush crept up Preston's neck, but he rallied. She came in here looking like she works in the back, not like a guest, he scoffed. Places like this have standards for a reason. You lower them, and pretty soon you're serving burgers in paper bags. Lucas's lips parted slightly, as if surprised that even now, the man doubled down. Naomi, he said, still looking at Preston, tell me again what you were doing before you came here. She lifted her chin. Teaching leadership and public speaking to black teenagers at the community center, she replied. Kids with more drive and potential than most of the people who laughed when your friend over there said I didn't belong. A few faces reddened. A couple at the bar looked away, ashamed. Lucas finally shifted his attention back to Elena and Victoria, who had just appeared at her side, heels clicking sharp and fast over the marble. Mr. Brooks, Victoria began quickly, her professional smile stretched tight. Let's not escalate this in front of our guests. I'm sure we can find a way to make this right. If you and your wife would like to be seated, we can— No, Naomi cut in quietly. Both women's heads snapped toward her, as if they'd forgotten she had a say. This isn't about getting a table now that you know who I married, she said, voice steady. It's about how comfortable you were throwing me out when you didn't. Victoria inhaled, a flicker of frustration breaking through her glossed expression. We're simply trying to maintain our environment, she said. We reserve the right to refuse service when someone's presence disrupts that. Naomi gave a small, disbelieving laugh. The only thing I disrupted was your assumptions, she said, and Mr. Whitmore's hobby of using public spaces to belittle strangers. A small ripple of reaction moved through the diners at that. Lucas squared his shoulders. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice no longer soft. You're going to explain clearly what standards my wife failed to meet that justified humiliating her in front of a room full of people. You're going to do it now. And you're going to do it loud enough that everyone who watched her walk out can hear it. Victoria's mouth opened. No words came. Elena's hand shook slightly on the podium. Tyler, hovering near the entrance, looked like someone had dropped a stone into his stomach. The room held its breath. And deep down, Naomi knew. Whatever they said next would change more than one reservation. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The chandeliers glowed on. Glasses still caught the light. But the easy murmur of wealth that had floated through the ivory spire all evening shrank into an uneasy hush. Victoria cleared her throat, desperately groping for corporate language to cover what had been, until 5 minutes ago, invisible to everyone who benefited from it. Mr. Brooks, she began, as I said, there was a misunderstanding. Our hostess interpreted your wife's behavior. My wife's behavior was asking for a table. Lucas cut in, eyes sharp. That's all she did. Is that listed under aggressive conduct in your handbook? A few people chuckled nervously. No one rushed to defend the manager. Victoria's painted lips flattened. We take the comfort of all our guests seriously, she said. Mr. Whitmore expressed that he felt. I expressed that she didn't fit, Preston called out, apparently incapable of reading a room even now. Someone has to say what we're all thinking. He gestured broadly with his glass again. Red wine sloshed over the rim, splattering onto the pristine tablecloth like a smear of accusation. Look around, he continued, emboldened by his own voice. People come here for an experience, to be around a certain caliber. You start letting in whoever wanders in off Peachtree in dusty jeans and, Preston, someone hissed from his table, a woman grabbing his arm in mortified warning. He shook her off. What? He barked. Are we pretending like this place isn't what it is? We're not a soup kitchen. The words hung there, ugly and heavy. Naomi stared at him, the sting of each syllable landing on the bruises of her pride. Behind the anger, something quieter ached. The knowledge that for men like him, there was no version of her that would ever be enough. Lucas took a step closer to the center of the room, releasing her hand briefly so he could address the entire restaurant. Let's make sure we're not pretending then, he said, voice steady but commanding. Because contrary to Mr. Whitmore's worldview, my wife didn't wander in off the street. She walked in here after a full day of working with kids your city has forgotten, trying to give them tools to stand in rooms like this without shrinking. He turned, meeting faces at table after table. She sits on the board of the Brooks Foundation, which has donated more to Atlanta's literacy and youth programs in the last 3 years than this restaurant has paid in property taxes since it opened. She came here to book dinner for the 10th anniversary of the night we sat in that corner. He pointed toward a small table near the back. When I was just a broke developer praying my card wouldn't decline when the check came. Soft laughter rippled through the room at that, quickly swallowed by the weight of his next words. She is the reason I stayed in this city when we could have moved the company anywhere, he added, because she made me see the parts of Atlanta that don't get photographed for your brochures. And tonight, your staff decided that a black woman in a sweater didn't meet your standards. Silence. Real silence. Even Preston didn't have a quip ready. Naomi stood beside him, hands clenched into fists at her sides, heartbeat loud in her ears. She hadn't asked him to list her resume, but hearing him speak the fullness of her in a room that had just tried to reduce her to not our kind sent a tremor through her chest. Tyler shifted near the entryway, eyes wide, face pale. He suddenly looked much younger than 20. She tried to explain, he blurted, his voice cracking into the stillness. All heads turned toward him. He swallowed but went on. She said it was for your anniversary. She said this place meant something to you both. No one listened. I did what I was told, but it felt wrong. Tyler, Victoria snapped, alarm and anger sharpening her tone. That's enough. He flinched but didn't step back. No, he said, more firmly now. It's not enough. Not anymore. He reached behind his neck, tugged at the collar of his black jacket, and shrugged it off. The uniform's embroidery, the ivory spire, flashed for a moment before he dropped the jacket onto the podium next to Elena's shaking hands. I'm done, he said louder this time. I won't keep escorting people out just because they don't look like the brochure. A gas fluttered around the room. Elena stared at the jacket as if it were a grenade. Tyler, don't be ridiculous, she snapped. You need this job. He nodded. I did, he said, but I need to sleep at night more. He turned to Naomi, shame and determination warring on his face. I'm sorry, he said to her directly. I shouldn't have just gone along. Naomi held his gaze. She saw the fear, the paycheck hanging in the balance, the flicker of conscience that had finally overpowered both. Thank you for saying it, she replied quietly. The room stirred again. Near the back, an elderly woman with silver hair neatly pinned at the nape of her neck, placed her napkin on the table and rose. Her husband, stooped but dignified in a charcoal suit, pushed back his chair and stood beside her, hand resting lightly on her arm. They walked slowly, deliberately across the dining room toward Naomi and Lucas. The sound of their steps, soft soles on marble, was strangely loud. Mr. Brooks, the woman said when they reached them. Mrs. Brooks? Her voice carried the steady confidence of someone who had been listened to for most of her life. Yes, ma'am, Lucas answered, tone respectful. My name is Margaret Ellison, she said. My husband and I have been coming here since long before it rebranded as the Ivory Spire. We've watched the prices go up and the portions go down, but we stayed because we believed this place still cared about more than appearances. Her eyes slid briefly to Victoria and Elena, then back to Naomi. Tonight I see we were wrong, she said simply. Her husband nodded, glasses catching the chandelier's glow. I was here when they turned away a young black man in a work shirt years ago, he said. Told myself there must have been more to the story. We chose to look away. That's on us. He looked now at Preston, whose face burned crimson. But there's no looking away from this, he continued. If this is how they treat the woman who built the programs our foundation partners with, then we've been eating in the wrong place. He took a breath. Mrs. Brooks, he said, inclining his head to Naomi, if you'll have us, we'd be honored to support your work directly. Because character, he glanced once more at Preston, isn't served on a plate, no matter what the menu costs. A murmur of agreement rose, tentative at first, then stronger. Someone at the bar said, he's right. Another diner added, this is ugly, we all saw it. Preston scoffed, clinging to what little control he felt he had left. Oh, please, he sneered. You're all going to ruin your evening over some overreaction and a sob story? This place will be fine. People like us always have somewhere to go. People like who? Naomi asked quietly. Her voice was calm now, almost too calm. The question cut cleaner than any shout could have. Preston's mouth opened and closed, but for once, nothing coherent came out. Victoria stepped in, sensing the ground crumbling under her feet. Mr. Brooks, Mrs. Brooks, she said, voice tight. On behalf of the restaurant, I want to apologize. It's clear mistakes were made. I'm prepared to comp your anniversary dinner, offer you our private room, and… Naomi shook her head slowly. This isn't about the bill, she said. It's about watching you light up for him. She nodded at Preston's table. And freeze up for me. About policies that magically bend when a billionaire walks in, but snap like a trap when a black woman does. Lucas exhaled, the decision he'd been turning over in his mind settling into place. We're not staying, he said. We're not celebrating our marriage in a room that made my wife feel smaller on purpose. Victoria's composure cracked. Please, she said, taking a half step forward. At least allow us to… No, Lucas said, not unkindly, but with finality. You've shown us what your standards are. We'll choose a place that matches ours. Oi! He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, thumb flying over the screen. Naomi watched, eyebrows lifting slightly. What are you doing? Texting Morel, he replied quietly. He's been pushing me for weeks to sign off on integrating the Ivory Spire's booking system into our corporate concierge app. I was on the fence. Now I'm off it. He hit send. Done, he said. No partnership, no exclusive placement. If this is how you treat guests when you think no one important is watching, my company isn't sending you more. That landed as heavily as his name had. The Ivory Spire prided itself on its waitlist, but that waitlist depended on corporate partnerships, hotel concierge, and the invisible scaffolding of recommendation systems. Victoria's face went ashen. Mr. Brooks, we can learn from this, she stammered. We can do better. Surely there's a way to... Doing better starts with being honest about what you've been doing, Naomi said. And that work, that's not on me. I already carry enough. She turned to Tyler. Find me after your last paycheck clears, she told him. The youth program I run can use someone who knows what it feels like to go along with something and decide not to, finally. His eyes widened, hope flaring through the shame. Really? He asked. Really, she said. The elderly couple stepped aside as Naomi and Lucas moved toward the door, hand in hand again. The room parted for them, not out of deference to his wealth, but out of the uncomfortable awareness that they had just witnessed something that couldn't be unseen. As they reached the entrance, Lucas paused and looked back one last time. His voice was calm, but there was nothing soft in it. Places like this love to say they value excellence, he said. Maybe start by figuring out whether that includes basic decency. He pushed the door open. Cool night air rushed in, chasing out a little of the lavender and polished wood. Naomi stepped into the streetlight with him, her gray sweater glowing faintly in the Bentley's reflection. They did not look back. Inside, the ivory spire remained gleaming in gold, but something at its core had cracked. 3 weeks later, the air in Atlanta had turned crisper, the bite of late fall sharp enough to make the breath visible. Street trees along the west side had shed half their leaves, scattering amber and rust across cracked sidewalks. Naomi stood outside a low-brick building whose windows glowed with soft, welcoming light. It sat on a corner where, not long ago, a liquor store and a payday lender had been the loudest signs of life. Tonight, a hand-painted sign above the door read, Harbor Hearth. In smaller letters beneath, pay what you can, everyone eats. Through the glass, long wooden tables stretched across the room, crowded with people. Kids bounced on benches, an elderly man carefully lifted a spoon to his lips. A pair of nurses in scrubs laughed over steaming bowls of soup. No dress code posted, no velvet rope, no certain clientele, just people. Naomi adjusted the shawl over her shoulders. Her dress was simple and comfortable, the color of plums. Her curls were loose around her face. The chalk dust that had once clung to her jeans had been replaced by a faint smear of flour on her forearm from helping fold bread dough in the kitchen. Beside her, Lucas slid his hands into the pockets of his coat, cheeks slightly pink from the cold. This looks nothing like the ivory spire, he observed. That's the point, Naomi said. They shared a small, private smile. Ready? He asked. For our real anniversary dinner? She replied. Yeah, I am. They stepped inside together. Warmth wrapped around them immediately. Not the curated, perfumed sort, but the warmth of bodies, cooking, and laughter. The air smelled of garlic, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. Someone had strung mismatched fairy lights across the ceiling, their soft glow flattening the distance between one table and the next. A young woman with a nose ring and an apron smeared with tomato sauce greeted them at the door. Hey there, she said, beaming. Welcome to Harbor Hearth. You two together? Yes, Naomi replied. First time? The server asked. First as paying customers, Lucas said. Not as investors. She laughed. Well, tonight you're just people with stomachs, she said. Grab any open spot. Someone will come by with plates. Leave what you can in the jar on the way out. Or don't. We're covered. Naomi's chest swelled. When she'd first pitched the idea, repurposing an old warehouse into a pay-what-you-can restaurant staffed by a mix of volunteers, trainees, and a few salaried chefs, some board members had hesitated. It'll never be sustainable. People will take advantage. You shouldn't mix philanthropy with food service. But the night at the Ivory Spire had given her something stronger than a business plan, a living example of what she refused to replicate. They found a spot at a long table where a little girl in a pink hoodie was carefully rearranging cupcake sprinkles on her plate. Across from them, an older woman in a faded floral dress smiled shyly and nodded hello. No one looked them up and down. No one asked if they had a reservation. A few minutes later, bowls of vegetable stew, baskets of bread, and plates of roasted chicken arrived. The food was simple. The flavors were warm and honest. Lucas took a bite, closed his eyes, and let out a sound somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. This tastes like someone cares, he said. Naomi nudged his shoulder. That's because someone does, she replied. Half the kids from my after-school program helped prep the vegetables today. As if on cue, the door opened and a familiar lanky figure stepped in, shaking off the cold. Tyler scanned the room, spotted them, and broke into a grin that transformed his face. He wore jeans and a faded hoodie now, a lanyard around his neck that read, Youth Mentor, Harbor Hearth. You made it, he said, weaving between chairs to reach their table. Told you we would, Naomi said, standing to hug him briefly. How's the training program? He sat down next to them, cheeks flushed with more than just the cold. It's intense, he admitted. I thought I was just signing up to help in a kitchen, but this whole leadership through service thing? He shook his head with a small laugh. Turns out feeding people is like step one. The real work is listening. Naomi smiled. You're doing good work, she said. I saw your proposal for that first job workshop you want to run for teens. The foundation board loved it. His eyes widened. Seriously? He asked. I thought you were just being polite when you said to send it over. I don't do polite promises, Naomi said. I do follow through. Tyler ducked his head, clearly trying to hide how much that meant. From the far side of the room, the door opened again. This time it was the elderly couple from the Ivory Spire, Margaret and her husband, Arthur. They entered slowly, taking in the lively, mismatched scene with a mix of curiosity and wonder. Over here, Naomi called, lifting a hand. Margaret's face lit up. They made their way over, Arthur pausing to pat a toddler's hair as they passed. You weren't exaggerating, Margaret said as she reached the table. This place is alive. Sit, Naomi urged, scooting down to make space. Tonight you're not donors or patrons. You're just family. Arthur chuckled as he eased himself onto the bench. After watching you walk out of that gilded icebox, he said, we figured we owed it to ourselves to see what the alternative looks like. How's that going? Lucas asked. Adjusting to soup instead of foie gras? Arthur took a spoonful of stew, tasted, and smiled slowly. Tastes like the first restaurant my mother took me to after my father lost his job, he said. Everything we could afford was on one plate, but the owner treated us like we were worth more than the bill. He looked around the bustling room at the mix of outfits and ages and skin tones. I've missed this, he added softly. Margaret glanced at Naomi. We read the article, she said. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Which one? The one in the Chronicle, Margaret said. The feature on dignity at the door. They interviewed Tyler too. Tyler nearly inhaled his water. They did, he coughed. They said it was just a quick phone call. It was a full column, Arthur said, amused. Your quote about not wanting to be the guy who opens doors only to drag people out of them? That stuck. Tyler's ears went pink. Guess that's one way to get over being the escort at the Ivory Spire, he muttered. Naomi leaned her elbows on the table. After the night they'd walked out, she'd assumed the experience would live mostly in her chest and in a few uncomfortable memories for the diners who witnessed it. But someone had recorded a piece of it. Her being led to the door, Lucas confronting the staff, Tyler tossing his jacket. The video had done what videos do. It raced through timelines. It landed on feeds of people who had never stepped foot inside the Ivory Spire, but knew exactly what it felt like to be measured and dismissed in an instant. Commentary followed. Articles unpacked what had happened. Some were messy, some were thoughtful. Then came the formal statements. We do not condone discrimination in any form. We are reviewing our policies. We are committed to diversity and inclusion. Naomi had rolled her eyes at most of them, but some things went beyond slogans. Victoria's resignation was announced quietly, couched in pursuing new opportunities. Elena's departure followed a week later. A letter had arrived at Naomi's office with her name on it in unfamiliar, neat handwriting. Inside, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I'm sitting with the fact that my silence hurt you. I built a career on reading people at the door, and tonight I'm wondering who else I misread because I thought their worth was hanging in their closet instead of in their character. I'm trying to do the work now, somewhere less shiny. Elena Naomi hadn't replied. Not yet. Some wounds took more than 3 weeks to scab over, but she hadn't thrown the letter away either. It sat in a drawer, its weight small but real. The Ivory Spire itself had changed hands. Rumor had it that the new ownership group was quietly meeting with community leaders about how to repair the damage. Whether that would lead to anything more than a PR campaign remained to be seen. Naomi had no interest in being their mascot. Her work was here. At Harbor Hearth, a boy with braids carefully balanced 3 bowls on a tray, tongue sticking out in concentration. A woman in a business suit cut her chicken slowly, listening intently as the elderly man beside her described the mural that used to be on the wall across the street. A teenager in a Harbor Hearth apron and chipped nail polish refilled water glasses like every person at her table mattered equally. Lucas watched it all with a soft, contemplative expression. "You know," he said quietly, "if you'd asked me 10 years ago what success looked like, I'd probably have set a table at the Ivory Spire, with my name on a little brass plaque." "And now?" Naomi asked. He squeezed her hand under the table. "Now it looks like this," he said. "Food you can't photograph for clout. People who don't care what brand my watch is. A room you belong in even when no one knows your last name." The little girl in the pink hoodie across from them suddenly dipped her cupcake into her stew, giggled, and made a face. Her mother sighed, then laughed with her. Naomi smiled, a slow warmth spreading through her chest. "Worth isn't stitched into labels," she said, half to him, half to herself. "It's in how we treat each other when the door opens. When someone walks in wearing something we don't expect. When no one's filming." Margaret nodded. "Places like the Ivory Spire forget that," she said. "They confuse polish with value. But everyone in this room, they're the ones who keep the city's heart beating." From somewhere near the kitchen, someone clanged a spoon against a metal pitcher. "Hey, everybody," a voice called. One of the chefs, tall and broad-shouldered, apron dusted in flour. "Quick announcement before dessert. Tonight marks Harbor Hearth's official opening month. Thanks to a certain couple at that table," he gestured toward Naomi and Lucas. "We've served over 3,000 meals. No one turned away, and we just approved funding for our first youth culinary program." Applause burst out, loud and genuine. Naomi ducked her head, suddenly shy. "This isn't just us," she called back. "This is everyone who decided that a table can be more than a status symbol." Tyler cupped his hands around his mouth. "And everyone who quit a bad job," he added, grinning, "so they could help at a better one." Laughter rippled around them. Lucas leaned in and pressed his forehead lightly to Naomi's temple. "Happy anniversary," he murmured. "Happy anniversary," she replied. They clinked their water glasses together instead of wine. Outside, the city pulsed on, tower lights blinking, cars weaving through traffic, people in expensive clothes walking into expensive buildings. Some of those buildings might one day mean something again, if they chose to change, if they chose to do more than issue statements. But tonight, the most important building in Naomi's world was this low brick space filled with mismatched chairs and equal dignity. As their story settles into your mind, let me ask you this. If you'd been sitting in the Ivory Spire that night, what would you have done when Naomi was told she wasn't welcome like this? Would you have looked away, laughed along, or stood up, even if your voice shook? Tell us in the comments. Your perspective matters more than any chandelier or dress code ever will. Thank you for staying with Naomi and Lucas through their journey from rejection to reclamation. More stories of truth, resilience, and quiet revolutions are on the way. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, the most powerful rooms are the ones where everyone belongs.